Character design is a field that I can only really describe with the phrase too many cooks in the kitchen, an idiom used to describe how counterproductive it is when having too many people involved in managing an activity. Part of what makes up a lot of discourse throughout game communities is that of a character's application in gameplay, irrespective of the genre and on occasion irrespective of which aspect of that character. In any title with a selection of units, this sort of conversation tends to stir a direction of thought that permeates throughout the player base for better or worse. Ever since I created Vars 2 about a year ago and adopted the Why No One Play series from Vars 1, I've been looking through the various episodes I've made both in and out of the series and noticed that in an almost ironic twist, Genshin Impact is more divisive on this sort of narrative than other games where such a discussion would be more relevant, as evident by the fact that you can discern similarities in thought processes for each video. Where I think this is displayed most is regarding supports. Granted, every character in this game has a slew of players debating over their strengths and weaknesses, but at least in the DPS department, it's easy to pinpoint and to an extent grade them in a hierarchy based on how well the rest of the cast is realistically able to augment their performance in combat. And that's where today's video comes in. I wanted to start a discussion on what led to the Genshin fandom deeming certain supports good and others bad, the environment that influenced our priorities, as well as the characters and their designs themselves. In a way, this is a continuation of my well-designed characters video a couple months ago. Just a moment though, if it's alright with you guys, we have a sponsor for today's video, Outplayed. Outplayed is one of the premier video capturing apps for just about every popular game out there, including Genshin. If you ever find yourself pulling off some crazy burst rotation or want to flex off how much damage you can do in a single blow, this is one way to do it. Outplayed automatically captures any interesting highlights during your play or allows you to record manually using a hotkey, which you can then immediately port over to your Discord server or have it uploaded to YouTube, anywhere you feel like sharing. The app also has a built-in video editor if you feel like touching it up a bit before sharing, and the best part is that it works for hundreds of games besides Genshin Impact. You can use it for Among Us, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Valorant, and Minecraft just to name a few. It's downloaded via Overwolf, which most of you likely have already, so just a few clicks and it's ready to go. If you're interested in using Outplayed, feel free to use the link on screen or in the description. It's a very simple but cool app that makes recording highlights easier for you. Thanks again to Outplayed for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back into it. Despite there being a lot of team building games that are predicated on forming a cohesive unit with a clear win condition, there's a subtle difference in how they're done in other games versus how they're done in Genshin. As a parallel, let's go over to League of Legends. I understand the two entirely separate genres, but it's important in establishing what I mean. On each team, you have 5 players operating their own champion, and those champions are selected from a roster of almost 160 at the time of making this video. Like other games, champions come from an assortment of classes: marksmen, tanks, mages, assassins, fighters, supports, what have you. Regardless, they have their own abilities, passives, and playstyles, much like how Genshin's units have their passive talents, active talents, and a function to them. Champions and subsequently, whether by intent or coincidence, have properties that synergize well with each other. An example is Malphite and Yasuo. The former's ultimate is a high-speed long-range dash that knocks up all enemies caught in the target area, allowing the latter to make use of his ultimate, which can only work against airborne enemies, making for a potent combination. Common sense would pair these two up in light of their devastatingly strong combo, and frequently they are, but the champions were not designed for any specific assortment of teams or scenarios. Yasuo is able to perfectly execute on all of his moves with or without the assistance of his teammates and vice versa. In essence, the priority in designing a character lies in their independent functions first, with synergistic components as more of an added bonus, the cherry on top if you will. Genshin approaches character design in the opposite order, at least for me it does. On a fundamental level, yes, each unit is designed so as to be fully functional without any outside intervention necessary. As of now, there haven't been any who explicitly require the presence of another character to reach full benefit. It's not like Yoimiya having a passive talent that gives her bonus damage when Klee's in her party type of thing. However, due to the nature of the game's combat revolving around elemental reactions, you can make a case for there being X and Y characters to implicitly have to be put together. What lends more credence to this notion is that elemental reactions are unique in their own ways, rather than type advantages like Pokemon where fire beats grass, grass beats water, and water beats fire. Elements are not directly competing against each other in the form of a matchup chart. In other words, checks and balances are out of the question since you can only gain from elemental reactions, and so, to judge the significance of each reaction and by extension who can achieve them, relative strength is used to measure the viability of something instead. Or in layman's terms, if you had to choose between working a job that pays $15 an hour versus a job that pays $20, everyone will choose the 20, contextual circumstances notwithstanding. But of course, for such a thing to be efficient or mandatory, there needs to be content in line with that. In a vacuum, the $20 job is more efficient than the $15 one, but that's primarily assuming you need the extra $5 an hour to stay afloat. If you had millions of dollars in your bank account, you wouldn't really care about the $5 difference, choosing instead to go for whichever job is more enjoyable. For what feels like the millionth time since I said this, Genshin Impact is not a game famous for its difficulty endgame-wise. Therefore, necessitating the strongest or most efficient reactions is by and large not of great importance. So then, why is such an emphasis placed on a character's relative strength when all is said and done, it doesn't matter? Well, for one, that's just how gamers are. The vast majority of players intrinsically pursue the most effective tactic available because that gives them the most comfortable experience in playing the game. Psychologically speaking, if there's an easier way to do something, then why not do it? Examples to the contrary are indeed present. Challenge runs like Nuzlocke are popular within the Pokemon community, but that's only because the games don't pose enough of a challenge on their own to incentivize replayability. Therefore, players impose their own restrictions. Even so, the average person has a tendency to compose their party with whatever is strong and effective. It's why Garchomp is so widely used in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, and why Gyarados is a great pick in Gen 1, so on and so forth. How this affects usability for Genshin support characters is twofold. First, win conditions. No matter where you are in the game, be it Spiral Abyss, an artifact domain, a world boss, commissions, what have you, there is a win condition that needs to be met. Usually in every situation, the ultimate goal is to kill anything that moves. Supports are then rated based on 1. How much total output they contribute to that win condition, or basically how much effective damage they give their main DPS in whatever form that takes, and 2. How many parties and situations they can achieve that outcome in. Going off the first aspect alone, a support's speculative value is calculated based on how productive they are to the team and whether or not they can do this in more than just one party. Let's use Sucrose as an example, mostly because I know a lot of you were upset that I failed to mention her at all in my supports video. Apologies by the way. Sucrose's claim to fame originates from a role as the frontrunner of most if not all Taser teams. For the uninitiated, Taser party compositions entail continuous use of the electrocharge reaction, in which you basically apply as many instances of electrocharge as possible. Since you're able to simultaneously have electro and hydro without either clearing the other, it's a very consistent and persistent form of damage that can work against single and multi-targets alike. Sucrose performs well in this department for her ability to apply widespread elemental damage, in this case either hydro or electro through swirl, while amplifying her team's elemental mastery and elemental damage, not only increasing the damage she and the rest of her party are doing individually, but the damage from elemental reactions as well. Moreover, through swirl she's able to trigger electrocharge herself so long as she absorbs either of the necessary elements. Because Sucrose builds full elemental mastery, she juices up both swirl and electrocharge at the same time. Technically speaking, the only things you need to facilitate a Taser party composition is a Hydro and Electro unit. Everything else is fair game. Sucrose just so happens to be able to mix and match with any arrangement of this build on account of her massive area coverage and off-field presence. In this case, her total output comes in the form of an obscene amount of area coverage and DPS improvement. Since the requirements for Taser comps are lenient in that all you need to do is have a consistent source of Electro and Hydro, Sucrose works in any relevant party. That's just one part of her usage, being an Animo unit with off-field effects and crowd control, not to mention the ridiculously broken elemental shred on Vars and Venerer. Sucrose can supply elemental effects for Vaporize and Overload as well, making her a very flexible support. Naturally, players will be more inclined to invest in her for her synergy with basically everyone except Geo characters. What she does is conducive to a wide variety of win conditions, although I'd argue a lot of that has to do with Animo being the single most powerful element in the game from a theoretical standpoint. A counterexample of this would be someone like Xinyan, debatably one of Genshin's worst characters that costs money. Her main premise is that she's a physical damage dealer, automatically making her niche since physical damage is only one reaction that applies to it, Superconduct. Speaking of which, Superconduct is a reaction that makes use of Electro and Cryo to deal cryo damage to all enemies in an area before shattering 40% of their physical resistance. Given that elemental reactions have a lot of equity in combat, Superconduct is obligatory to the success of any physical damage composition. Here's where Xinyan encounters her first roadblock. She's a pyro character, making her unable to access Superconduct without outside assistance. At first glance, it may not seem like a problem considering Sucrose can't access Electrocharge without a Hydro and Electro unit, but remember that physical damage is not an area of flesh with choices that focus on it, and anyone who does conflicts with Xinyan. The other two primary physical damage units are Eula and Razor, who are main DPS units, and neither have persistent effects. Furthermore, Eula is Cryo while Razor is Electro. One less party slot that needs to be taken up since they themselves fit half the equation to achieve Superconduct, hence why Xinyan has been relegated to support. Fortunately for her, she has the means to augment physical damage alongside a bit of defense, but that's not what her entire gameplay was designed around. It's just that that's the only part of her moveset that contributes to her team's win condition without being counterproductive to any of her party members. Xinyan can only pragmatically be used as a support, but she's not a support character. The reason Sucrose is so good is because her kit was designed, whether intentionally or coincidentally, to be as unintrusive as possible. Her elemental skill is a quick burst of Animo damage, battery, and crowd control, while her elemental burst is periodic bursts of animo damage and crowd control. She rarely has to be on the field to do her job, even though she ultimately ends up being on the field most of the time thanks to Taser. That was a lot of tease. Additionally, you want to go full elemental mastery on her so she can spread that to the rest of her team. And in doing so, her own reactions deal so much damage because she has so much elemental mastery. It's a win-win. On the subject of building, that's where Xinyan runs into her second roadblock. On paper, she's a main DPS unit and has several elements in her kit that scale off her defense. First being the shield from Sweeping Fervor, so to have a bigger shield you have to stack defense. But unlike Elemental Mastery, defense does not increase your offensive capability on its own. Secondly, her final constellation converts a portion of her defense to attack for her charge attack. But the scaling is too low to where, correct me if I'm wrong, you would get more value out of building raw attack than relying on this hybrid conversion, meaning the only benefit you get out of building defense is more tankiness, but there are so many other units who can do that better than she can, and I mean a lot of other units. All in all, Xinyan is too niche and too inefficient of a character. She sees virtually no usages outside of physical damage comps, and even within those comps, her viability is hamstrung further by not being either cryo or electro. This in tandem with their awkward split between attack and defense as well as physical and pyro damage makes her a bad support, not just in effectiveness but also design. It almost feels like two different people were working on the same character. Now, from what I talked about so far, it may seem like my rationale on what makes a support good or bad is whether or not they have big numbers. It looks like that because of the second factor influencing character usability: restrictions, outside factors that hinder a character from being able to perform their intended task when they would otherwise be able to do so. Another way to increase the viability of a unit is by making them the only one you can use. As controversial as it sounds, I personally believe it's one of the best ways to structure a game with a wide pool of characters to choose from. Two of my favorite games of all time when I was younger were the spin-off titles Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale Darkness. I know I'm bringing up Pokemon a lot, it just happened that way. Among many other things, I enjoyed how they gave players very limited options of Pokemon. Normally in every game you have a ton of choices for your party, but in those games you had to choose between 50 for Colosseum and 83 for XD. Since traditionally strong Pokemon were few and far between in both versions, many would find themselves resorting to picks they would have never bothered to give a second thought in a regular main series game. It was a refreshing and understandably challenging experience. Well-designed gacha games are aware of the fact that they will eventually have dozens upon dozens or maybe hundreds upon hundreds of characters. To prevent or mitigate units from easily overshadowing others, restrictions are put in place to encourage, perhaps even force players to diversify. This might be done via type matchups like a boss that's entirely immune to fire and ice attacks, or it can be a boss that flies around requiring you to make use of long-range attacks instead of melee. In Genshin's defense, it does have a few instances where certain characters are more efficient than others. Some enemies like the Abyss Lector / Heralds are resistant to whatever element they embody, or on occasion there's that one defense chamber in Spiral Abyss that basically screams at you to use Venti. But the game itself wasn't designed around that. For Pokemon, type advantages and disadvantages play a critical role in your experience of the game. In Genshin, they don't. That's why units like Bennett and Xingqiu feel like they monopolize so many parties because there aren't that many restrictions, if any at all, that prevent them from doing what they want to do. Sure, maybe the rise of enemies that like to run around a lot reduce Bennett's efficiency, but not by enough to invalidate his usefulness. Lack of restrictions does mean that you can theoretically use whatever the hell you want, but since there's nothing directly imposed on you by the game, most players will default to whatever is the easiest and most comfortable to use as there's nothing stopping them from doing so. I made this video specifically towards support characters because there are so many supports in the game that have really interesting designs, powerful in their own right, but are not given much attention by the majority of players due to not being all-purpose or not having big dig damage. I know that sounds ironic, coming from someone who made a top 5 supports video a while back, which now that I think of it, I should have made a top 5 underrated supports instead. But therein lies the causality of why the average player doesn't understand the full potential of characters like Yunjin, Beidou, or Goro, just to name a few. Because you can clear everything in the game with like 10 characters, so there's no reason, voluntary or involuntary, that compels someone to explore said characters other than their own curiosity or if they like their appearance or personality. Which is a shame. Genshin has soon to be 7 playable elements, 5 weapons, and tons of different playstyles for every character, yet most people use the same 10 or so units because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, so there needs to be stuff that breaks it. I'm starting to sound like a broken record at this point. I've sort of accepted the fact that Genshin is meant to be played more like Animal Crossing, a relaxing chill game to play when you're bored or while you're waiting for food delivery. AJ, I'm looking at you.
I mean, $20 off my order, man. I had to, like honestly I had to.
But I really wish there was more to the game. Once again, on the upside, lack of challenge gives you more freedom to choose whatever the hell you want, but that comes with the issue of there being no external motivation to do anything other than the bare minimum, and in an action RPG, you need external motivation. It's not a sandbox like Minecraft. Anyways, the video is running kind of long, so I want to ask you guys, do you think the prevailing mentality on good and bad supports, or rather good and bad characters overall, is a result of the game not encouraging more diversity? Or is it something else entirely? I'd like to hear what you think. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time though, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.